What's up, Collective? How you guys doing this morning? Yeah? Well, good. Well, like they said, my name is Curtis, and I lead a new church just down the road from you guys, Charlestown. In fact, we haven't even publicly launched yet, and I got some things that I want to celebrate and update with you about. We've been building our team over the last several months, preparing for our September 28th launch. And I'm really excited to share with you that some of our team members are actually in the room with us today. Yeah, so that's a really cool, big deal, and I'm thankful for them. I'm thankful that they get to meet this place and that they get to meet you. I did a church planting residency here over the last year while my family and I were learning about Charlestown and settling into our new city. And I really can't say thank you enough to the collective leaders and the staff and the friends that we have made here. And to our team, I can't say thank you enough for helping us make this happen. In fact, one of the really cool things, Anthology is a collection of stories written by one author. And one of the things that I think is really special is this morning I want to give a special shout out to Janine, who actually is part of Collective and actually was Collective's very first baptism back in the day. Yeah, and she has decided to jump on team, and she is coming with us to Charlestown to help us write our story down there. So I want to honor you. Thank you, Janine, for doing that. And we're excited and, man, just thankful for what this story is already looking like and how Collective has been a part of that. So thank you guys very much. One last thing that I want to announce is today is the first time that we are saying publicly where we are meeting. And we finally have a location, and it's going to be Charlestown Middle School. And so we're excited for that. Yeah, I know. It's like, where do we clap? I don't know what to do. That's my bad. I don't do good with words and things like that. So. But what I love about that is it's right in line. If you didn't know, Collective actually launched in West Frederick Middle School, a middle school just down the road. And so I love that our stories are already mirroring so much and looking like what your guys' looked like. And I'm thankful that we get to be a part of it. So thank you for that. Thanks for having us here. You guys have been in this series that you're calling I'm Him. And as best as I can tell from the research that I have done, is the phrase first showed up when Kevin Gates dropped an album by that name in 2019. Yeah. And it really caught fire when Patrick Mahomes yelled it on the sideline after a playoff win, I'm Him. And what this phrase means is you're that guy. You're the guy that dominates in your space. And it's a phrase that's not meant to be whispered. Right? It's meant to be shouted. It's meant to be said with your chest, from your chest. And Jesus has a few of these I'm Him moments in Scripture, and we've been unpacking them over the last several weeks. Right? 1 week we talked about where He says, I am the true vine. And the idea is if you stay connected to Jesus, you thrive. If you get disconnected, you dry out. Where Jesus said, I am the bread of life. And the idea is that He alone, Jesus alone, satisfies the longings of our soul. He says, I am the light of the world, and it's when life gets confusing and dark, Jesus offers light and direction, gives clarity and hope. And last week we unpacked, I am the good shepherd, that Jesus knows us, and He calls out to us, and He cares for us the way a shepherd would for his sheep. And today we're unpacking, I am the resurrection and the life. Now, before we get into today's story, I think it's really important. I think sometimes we struggle to connect with stories in the Bible because we forget that these were real people in real places going through real situations, which means that they experienced real feelings, much like we experience. And that very much includes Jesus. Right? Especially when Jesus, like the Bible teaches this idea that Jesus was both fully God and fully man. And that's a really difficult concept for us to wrap our heads around, right? It's one of those truths that many of us just kind of have to lean in and trust, even if we cannot fully explain it. But part of what Jesus is showing us in these I'm Him statements is exactly that He is divine and He's human at the same time. And so what that means is it matters how we hear His words. Right? Because when Jesus speaks, He's not just articulating with diction, right? He's also saying it with tone. And tone really matters. A doctor by the name of Albert Mehrabian, he did research that's reported on at UCLA, and he found in his studies that emotionally charged communication, only 7% of the meaning comes from the words you say. That's wild. Only 7% of emotionally charged communication actually happens from the words that you say. 38% comes from the tone with which you say them. And 55% comes from your body language. And so what that means is that when the tone and the words don't match, we believe the tone. And other studies back this up. A neutral sentence like the phrase, "I didn't say you were wrong," can come across as either defensive, sarcastic, gentle, or sincere, all depending on the tone with which you say them. And one of the things they found is that babies respond to emotional tone long before they understand the words that you're saying. People make snap judgments about trust and confidence based on the tone that's being used. Often they decide that and they make those judgments in milliseconds. And none of that is a surprise to us, right? We know the difference between, because we live this, we know the difference between, "No, I'm fine," and "No, I'm fine," right? Right? We can hear the difference in, "Hey, collective, how you guys doing today? It's good to be back." And "What's up, collective? Man, I'm pumped to get to be with you guys this morning." We know the difference in those two things. We know what's communicated there. Tone shifts everything. And so as we jump into the story that we're reading in the Bible today, I want you to notice that, and that's important because John chapter 11, which is where we're going to be, is packed with emotion. And because it's so packed with emotion, and these are real people in real places going through real situations, it means they have real feeling. And so this story is packed with tone. And when we read it that way, it helps us experience not just what Jesus says, but how he says it and why it matters. All right, so we're going to jump in, John chapter 11, and ultimately this story spans verse 1 to verse 44. And we're going to read a bunch of it together, but I'm also going to summarize some of it. But check it out. Here's how the story begins. Verse 1, John chapter 11, starts like this. A man named Lazarus was sick, and he lived in Bethany with his sisters, Mary and Martha. This is the Mary who later poured the expensive perfume on the Lord's feet and wiped them with her hair. Her brother Lazarus was sick. Now, this perfume thing, it seems odd to us because it's 2025. It happens in the next chapter, in John chapter 12. Don't get sidetracked by it. It was kind of an honor and custom for them. And so it was a big deal. And it's there to help us distinguish which Mary this was. Right, so we find out Mary and Martha, they have a brother, Lazarus was sick. End of verse 2. So verse 3, it says, so the two sisters sent a message to Jesus telling him, "Lord, your dear friend is very sick." And all of this is pretty straightforward. And we know Jesus is somewhere in the neighborhood of 32 to 33 years old, and he's developed some really good relationships along the way, three of which are Martha, Mary, and Lazarus. Mary and Martha are the sisters of Lazarus. Lazarus gets sick. They send word to Jesus, "Hey, your dear friend is very sick." And most scholars agree, because of what happens in John chapter 10, which we'll talk about in a second, Jesus is somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to 20 miles away, which at that point in time was a full day's travel. And so this is what happens in verse 4. But when Jesus heard about it, he said, so when Jesus heard about Lazarus being sick, he said, "Lazarus' sickness will not end in death. No, it happened for the glory of God, so that the Son of God will receive glory from this." So although Jesus loved Martha, Mary, and Lazarus, he stayed where he was for the next 2 days. Guys, and to me, this verse right there, verse 6, is probably one of the most challenging verses in the entire Bible. Right, because Jesus gets word about the issue. There's no doubt that he heard. There's no, I wonder if Jesus hears my prayers. Jesus heard. And then he intentionally sits there. You see, and that's the kind of thing that probably would cause many people to walk away fast and never come back. Jesus, you knew. You did hear me. And you sat there. Right? That's exactly probably why some of you maybe sitting in this room, part of your story was maybe now or at some point in time where you felt like you were dragged to church because you prayed and prayed and prayed and you felt like Jesus just intentionally sat there. And one of the really challenging things about this, at least in this story, is that in this story, he does. Right, which leads us to the first thing that I had to write down and I would encourage you, like if you take notes, write this down. It's that when Jesus delays, it's not indifference, it's intentional. When Jesus delays, it's not indifference, it's intentional. And that's frustrating. And maybe it's even infuriating, and that's okay, as we're going to see in a moment. But Jesus was doing something bigger here than just some quick fix. You see, and it's been my experience that I think the Bible contains the words of life, right? I think following Jesus leads to a better life. Not necessarily easier, but better. And so maybe, and I want you to wrestle with this as we read the rest of the story, is maybe what feels like silence from God is really preparation. And what I want you to see is that waiting doesn't mean he stopped caring, right? But sometimes it means he's setting up a bigger story. And spoiler alert, and I don't feel bad about it because Jesus already tipped the hand to this in verse 4. Jesus is about to raise Lazarus from the dead. But what happens in the waiting is important. And so Jesus gets word about Lazarus being sick, and he stays 2 more days. And then in verse 7, it says, finally, he said to the disciples, let's go back to Judea. And it's almost like Jesus' head pops off the pillow that morning and was like, all right, it's time to go. And it really catches the disciples off guard because what we have found out, in John chapter 10, what happens is Jesus is teaching, I am the good shepherd, and the religious leaders, they don't like it. They don't like it, and they attempt to jump him and arrest him, and he pulls this like Lamar Jackson move, and he slips away untouched. And I realized that I could have said Jaden Daniels, or even with as many Eagles fans as we had back in February, I could have said Jalen Hurts. And I just want you guys to know that as a Cowboys fan, I just want to know what it's like to have a quarterback that can win a playoff game. So I'm whatever. But anyways, the point is they were just there. They were just in Judea, and they were meant to be arrested, and they were tried to be killed. And a message shows up that a good friend, Lazarus, is sick, and it feels urgent and risky, but Jesus stays 2 more days, and then 2 days later, all of a sudden, Jesus tells them, he's fallen asleep, let's go wake him up. And the disciples are like, what is happening, right? If he's sleeping, let him sleep. And they're like, no, we got to go. And so you can start to feel tension and frustration build. So then in verse 14, it says this, so Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus is dead. just cuts to the chase. Right, they're wrestling back and forth. What is happening? Look, guys, Lazarus is dead. And my guess is you could actually start to hear some of the tone, maybe some of the anger start to build up in Jesus' voice, right? Because he's told them what this looks like. And he's tipped the hand. And this isn't the first time Jesus has been teaching this kind of stuff, and they're just not getting it. So in verses 14 and 15, it says, so he told them plainly, Lazarus is dead. And for your sakes, I'm glad I wasn't there. For now, you will really believe. Come, let's go see him. And he tells them plainly. Now Jesus says, hey, look, he's dead. And I know you could feel the tension of the room begin to build because of what a guy named Thomas says next. And this, I think, is probably one of the most sarcastic Bible verses, but we don't really read the Bible that way. But I think Thomas kind of responds sarcastically because Jesus says, hey, look, let's go see him. Verse 16, Thomas, nicknamed the twin, once again was just in Judea where they were attempted to be killed. And Thomas says back to his fellow disciples, let's go too and die with Jesus. It's right, like, well, it's been a good ride, folks. Let's go. And I know it could be completely serious. It could be a statement of devotion, but knowing that this is Thomas, who just a little bit later gets the nickname Doubting Thomas because he doubts that Jesus does what he said he's going to do, I can't help but believe that Thomas's tone here is sarcastic. And so they set out. It's a full day's travel. And so I picture Jesus and his crew showing up towards the end of the day. Verse 17, it says this. It says, when Jesus arrived at Bethany, he was told that Lazarus had already been in his grave for 4 days. Bethany was only a few miles down the road from Jerusalem, and many of the people had come to console Martha and Mary in their loss. And I will notice this. When Martha got word that Jesus was coming, she went to meet him. But Mary, the sister, stayed in the house. They were separated. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if only you would have been here, my brother would not have died. Can you imagine saying that to Jesus when he shows up? And he says, but even now, I know that God will give you whatever you ask. Right? The significance of the 4 days note is that the body would have begun to experience decay. Right? As far as anybody who would have had like just a normal way of thinking, Lazarus' story is over. The body has begun to experience decay. And the sisters get word that Jesus is coming. Martha decides to run to Jesus. And look at what she says. Lord, if only you would have been here, my brother would not have died. And we've been there, right? Like we've been there at times where it's like, God, you could have. And you didn't. God, you should have. Why didn't you? And then, to add this to the mix, skip down to verse 32 when the sister, Mary, comes running out. And look what she says in verse 32. Now, when Mary came to the place where Jesus was and saw Jesus, she fell at Jesus' feet. She fell at his feet and she said to him, Lord, if only you would have been here, my brother would not have died. It's the same exact words. And so the only conclusion that I can come to when I read this is this has been a discussion in Mary and Martha's house, right? And they both came to the same exact conclusion. Jesus, if you would have been here, my brother would not have died. But what I want you to notice, and I think this is so cool. And this is the second thing I want you to write down, is that it's okay to be honest with Jesus even if it sounds like an accusation. It's okay to be honest with Jesus even if it sounds like an accusation. Mary and Martha both say the same exact thing. If you, Jesus, had been here, he would not have died. It's raw, it's straight up, it's packed with emotion, and it doesn't hold back. And I want you to notice that Jesus doesn't come at them. He meets them right where they are. And so the application for us is that we don't have to filter our pain before we bring it to Jesus. You can show up messy. And I would argue this is one of the reasons why Jesus is the resurrection and the life, because it has been my experience that when we show up with our pain and we talk with Jesus about it openly and honestly, it's at that point in time that your soul begins to get some of its life back. You begin to feel some of that life return to you. There's a book of the Bible called the Book of Psalms. And it's basically just a prayer journal by a bunch of different people that we happen to have. And look at what some of the honest conversations they had with God are. Psalm 13, verse 1 says this, "Oh Lord, how long will you forget me? Forever? How long will you look the other way?" Psalm 42, verse 3, "Day and night I have only my tears for food, while my enemies continually taunt me, saying, 'Where is this God of yours?'" Psalm 88, verse 10 and 11, Are your wonderful deeds of any use to the dead? Do the dead rise up and praise you, God? Can those in the grave declare your unfailing love? Can they proclaim your faithfulness in the place of destruction? I hope that maybe you can hear how raw each of those would show up in a prayer. How raw and unfiltered each of those were probably said in the tone that was packed in them. And I want you to notice that they didn't clean it up to take it to God in prayer. And so I would encourage you to not clean it up when you're taking to God in prayer what's hurting. Because look at what Jesus does in this moment. Martha comes running to him first. If you would have been here, my brother would not have died. And she says, but even now I know God will give you whatever you ask. So Jesus says in verse 23, he says, Jesus told her, your brother will rise again. Okay, he says again what this is going to look like. Lets her know your brother's story isn't over. And we, because of the spoiler alert, know the end of the story. But Martha, who's in it, I feel like, responds with more sarcasm. Verse 24. So Jesus says, your brother will rise again. And Martha says back, yes, Martha said, he will rise when everyone else rises at the last day. I know, Jesus. Thanks for the churchy answer. I get it. I'll see him again someday. I really wish I wouldn't have lost him now, though. And all of these things are coming together. I mean, all these things are coming together, and I think you can begin to understand like what pops up in this story about Jesus. And what Jesus says next, I imagine that he says with a gentleness and a firmness that only Jesus could master. He says in verse 25, Jesus told her, I am the resurrection and the life. Anyone who believes in me will live even after dying. Everyone who lives in me and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this, Martha? And so Jesus is still in this moment trying to point them to something bigger that's going on in this life. He's saying, with me, even the things that you have given up on are not over. And I want you to write this down. People will give up on things that Jesus hasn't finished yet. People will give up on what Jesus has not finished yet. The disciples in Judea, they had already moved on from Lazarus. Mary and Martha, Jesus, if you would have, he wouldn't have. Sure, someday, Jesus. Jesus goes on in verse 33. So he says, when he saw her weeping, he being Mary, and he saw her weeping and he saw the other people wailing with her, a deep anger welled up within him and he was deeply troubled. Verse 34, where have you put him? He asked them. They told him, Lord, come and see. Then Jesus wept. And the people who were standing nearby said, see how much he loved him? But some said, this man healed a blind man. Couldn't he have kept Lazarus from dying? And Jesus was still angry as he arrived at the tomb, a cave with a stone rolled across its entrance. Roll the stone aside, Jesus told them. But Martha, the dead man's sister, protested, Lord, he's been dead for 4 days. The smell will be terrible. Jesus responded, didn't I tell you that you would see God's glory if you believe? See, to everyone else besides Jesus, even though he had said it out loud at least 4 times at this point in time in the story, everybody else, it was over. They thought, this is done. But Jesus wasn't finished yet. You know, one of the things I think is interesting is oftentimes we spend a lot of time on verse 35 there where it says, then Jesus wept. But and we talk about sadness with Jesus, but the emotion that's mentioned is anger. Right in verse 37, this man healed a blind man. Couldn't he have kept Lazarus from dying? It's just wild. Like the tone and the emotion, the energy that's packed in this story. And I know this is a lot of Bible verses, but you did come to church today, so. But I hope the story's starting to come alive for you. In verse 41, so they rolled the stone aside, and Jesus looked up to heaven, and he said, Father, thank you for hearing me. You always hear me, but I said it loud for the sake of all these people standing here, so that they will believe you sent me. Then Jesus shouted, Lazarus, come out. And the dead man came out. And they forgot to record the man that peed himself. When they saw a dead man. And the dead man came out. His hands and feet bound in grave clothes, his face wrapped in a headcloth. And Jesus told them, unwrap him and let him go. You see, we spend so much time focusing on this, like Jesus wept, which is great. But you know, this is the only instance we have in the Bible where it says Jesus shouted. In Greek, which is what this part of the Bible was originally written in, because it was like the trade language of the day, it literally says he used a mega voice. My kids would call that my dad voice. I've got like my speaking voice, I've got my loud voice, and then my dad voice. And my dad voice is meant to grab your attention. It's meant to command respect. And I think that's what's going on here with Jesus. Because I think here Jesus is speaking with authority to Lazarus. Lazarus, come out. I think what Jesus is saying is that just because others think your story is over, it doesn't mean that Jesus does. Right, that friendship that you thought was beyond repair, that marriage that's hanging on by a thread, the dream that you've buried because it's just been rejection after rejection after rejection, the relationship with your kid, the relationship with your parent, the relationship with your sibling, your trust in people after all of the betrayal, your faith that was once alive, now numb, your self-worth being buried under all that shame, your mental health, that invisible battle, the addiction that you just can't seem to shake. Jesus doesn't flinch at what looks dead. He walks right into it because he's him. He is the resurrection and the life. And he speaks life right into it. And for some of you this morning, maybe you feel like you've been stuck inside the grave, but today you're hearing this voice. And I'm telling you, Jesus is calling you to something, maybe not to undo your past, but to invite you into something new in a bigger story. And that's what baptism is all about. Not perfection, not having it all figured out. It's saying, I trust Jesus to bring life where there's only been death. I want to follow him. And if that's waking up inside of you, right, if metaphorically Jesus is shouting to get your attention, I want you to mark the baptism box on your connection card. And what that does is that just starts a conversation. Because maybe what needs to come to life today is you. And I want to highlight one more thing from you in this story that I think is really important when you come to that moment of, man, I need Jesus. Look what he says in verse 44. And the dead man came out, his hands and feet bound in grave clothes, his face wrapped in a headcloth. Right? It was the way they would like bury him, and so he was almost like hopping out. And what does Jesus say there? Jesus told them, unwrap him and let him go. See, we need people to help us walk out of what we've been buried in. And this church is full of stories of people who have been buried in things and have found life again because of following Jesus. And we need you. Right? If he's brought your marriage back, help someone else believe theirs isn't over. If you have beaten shame, help unwrap that for someone else. If you've walked through anxiety, share what has carried you. If you forgave the unforgivable, someone needs to hear that. You see, Jesus still calls us to help each other out of what's been killing us. And so if hope is waking up inside of you, don't sleep on it. You've got to get plugged in here. You've got to have a church home. This is a great church full of great people who will help you unwrap from what you have been buried in. I hope that you can see how tone is so important throughout this story. And I hope as you go and you read other Bible stories, you will pay attention and help, let the story come alive for you. For me, my favorite part of this whole story is the fact that it includes he shouted. Because Jesus walks up to the tomb, he doesn't whisper. He doesn't plead or beg, oh, please, please. He shouts, Lazarus, come out. He's bold, it's expectant, full of authority. Because Jesus wasn't hoping something might happen, he knew that it would. Because when he speaks, life listens, because he is the resurrection and the life. So the question is simple for you this morning. Will you step out into the life that Jesus is calling you toward? Let's pray. God, we love you. God, thank you for loving us. God, thank you for these stories. God, thank you that you talked and you showed us and you demonstrated that Jesus was human just like us. God, thank you for details, including that he shouted and that he was feeling anger, God, because we've been there and we feel those things. God, would you help us hear how to step back into life, God, with whatever it is that feels dead with where we're at. God, and those of us who have stepped into that life, God, would you give us the courage to help those who need to be unwrapped of what it is that's been burying them. God, we love you, we thank you, we trust you, we give all this over to you. It's in your son's name we pray, amen.